All right, I like the spooky new theme. Good thinking. But hello. Welcome to another episode of the BookBaby Spotlight podcast, your home for interviews with authors, illustrators, editors, and other industry insiders from the world of self-publishing. I'm your host, Sam Saddam, joined as always by my producer and colleague, Chad Hinson.
Hey, Sam, happy to be here.
This month, we are talking about scary, spooky, haunting, macabre, and what I've got to say is my favorite topic of the year. All BookBaby Spotlight seasons will have a horror episode. So here we are.
Do you read a lot of horror, Sam?
Not a ton, but I did dive into both of our guest books and some Stephen King when growing up, probably way too young in retrospect, especially for some of the movies. What about you?
I think my favorite horror flick is the Saw series.
Okay.
My favorite, yeah.
There's like 9 of them now, right? I'll add them to my list before. I think I've seen the first couple, but there's definitely more in that series I haven't seen. What I'm really enjoying so far is the covers that our designers are churning out for some of these books. They tend to get really creative with the dark, gothic horror aesthetics.
Yeah, they for some great ads too.
That's right. I mean, what would be more compelling than blood splatters?
I mean, I'm thinking the new display ads platform that we offer in particular.
Yes, sir. We are pleased to announce a brand new product in our suite of promotional services here at BookBaby. We're now designing and running display ads. Chad, I know they're near and dear to your heart. So do you want to explain what a display ad is?
Essentially, what these display ads are is a partnership with Google that they do with businesses that allows us to place ads on their platform. So we can cast the net out around the internet and find interested readers for authors. And this is really cool because we can put their books on like major publications like New York Times, Forbes, CNN. And if you compare these to like the typical prices for PR, which would be around like $30,000 or higher, display ads you can run for as low as $100 a week. And yeah, you're on the front page of these major websites. I think it's a really good opportunity.
So these are the banner ads that'll like follow people around the internet?
Yeah. We will be following people around the internet. Yes.
Nice. If they show interest in BookBaby, we will continue to serve them BookBaby titles to read. So I was checking out J.S. Nelson's book. She's our first guest. She began writing in childhood and has just recently achieved her dream with BookBaby. She published a novel.
It feels good. It's been a lifelong dream to be an author, to actually have a book published out there and actually be able to say, hey, I'm an author. It's exciting.
So I know this is your debut novel, but it's obviously not your first writing. So what other projects have you worked on?
I was involved in a writer's group when I lived back in Indiana, and they had us write poems. So I did some of those. I've also written 2 children's books, which are being illustrated right now. Actually make that 3 children's books because I just finished one. And I've actually got a couple of books in the works.
So your book, Darkness Whispers, is a paranormal fantasy. Great title, by the way. You've got mystery, magic going on, but I'm curious, where do you start a book like this? How do you start?
Well, this book in particular started after a toxic relationship, just in noticing, other people after I got out of it, noticing other people that were involved in toxic relationships, how the toxic person acted to them, how the person involved, their mind was messed with, they just spiraled downward, as I did also in that relationship. And that just kind of got me thinking of, I've always thought of stories. I've always had a huge, wild imagination. Like I couldn't even watch horror movies when I was a kid because I couldn't sleep. This brought up, kind of a creature in my head that I could use for my story, the way that they got into people's heads and then, sent them spiraling downwards. So that, along with, I'd always seen pictures of abandoned amusement parks, and that always piqued my imagination also, what could go on in there, all the mystery and creepy things that could happen there. And it all just kind of came together, and I started writing down scenes here and there, and then it started forming itself into a story. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna go with this.
I was next going to ask about where the abandoned amusement park came from, because that's like top 5 terrifying settings right there.
Right. I think it was on Pinterest. I saw a picture of it. I was scrolling through and it stopped me and I was like, oh, that's creepy. I like it. I want to use it.
I was thinking back to the Nickelodeon show, Are You Afraid of the Dark?
that was one of the shows that I couldn't watch when I was a kid.
They had a TV movie that was set in the abandoned amusement park and kept me up as well.
Yeah.
So how long were you writing this book?
I started in 2015. I finished writing it in early 2019. And then it took about 2 years to find BookBaby. I guess I was writing it for 4 years, and then 6 years till it got published.
So did that give you more time to reflect? You said it's all based kind of on that experience. 5 years later, you're going to have kind of a different understanding of the immediate aftermath of a relationship.
It did. It really did. Some of the scenes I had written down right after the relationship, looking back on them, in the story was kind of like, did that really happen? You know what I mean? Is someone actually able to get a hold of your mind like that?
So I'm curious what your goal was of adding the journal entries to the text. I thought that was a really interesting choice.
Well, when I first started, I couldn't decide if I wanted to do the point of view from Lisa, the mom's perspective, or from Melina, the daughter's perspective. And then as I kept writing, I realized that they both had a unique perspective to it that the reader could glean a lot from. So I figured if I could somehow put both of their points of view in there, that would make it more enjoyable for the reader.
So the journal entries are the mother's?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So what authors do you think have been most influential or inspiring to you?
I think Edgar Allan Poe is probably the most. He, I don't know, we read, I think it was ninth grade. We read one of his stories in class, and that was the first time I read Poe. And I was just, I don't know, it just got a hold of me, got a hold of my imagination. It really stuck with me, and just his, I don't know, the way that he could get into the darkest parts of the human mind and soul. Like I said, it really stuck with me more than any other stories I'd read up to that time. And since then, I've read everything of his I could get a hold of.
So how did you end up self-publishing? You said it took you 2 years. Were you trying to traditionally publish it at that point?
I queried agents through those 2 years. I think it was over 120 agents. The majority of them said that it wasn't a bad idea, but it was too different from anything that's been sold before. And as a first-time author, it's too risky. They want, something that will definitely sell, by either an established author or in an established genre. So I started looking at self-publishing because, I spent all these years working on this book, and I didn't want to just throw it in a drawer and forget about it and move on with life. So I got a book from the library about self-publishing. I forget what it was called now, but they had several different options in there. And BookBaby was the only one that seemed to have like the whole package deal where the author didn't have to, do anything publishing-wise on that end. I could just upload it to BookBaby and they took care of all of it.
So how are you going about marketing? Are you using our marketing services for that as well?
I haven't yet. We're trying to save up some money to be able to pay for ads and things like that. Right now, I'm on Goodreads, so I asked all my friends on Goodreads to read it and rate it. Friends and family have been great. They've all been reading it and posting on their social media. We've been putting out flyers. I know one of my friends has been putting flyers at airports for it.
All right, that was J.S. Nelson. Chad, how would you go about targeting ads for this book?
Yeah, I thought this book was very interesting. The concept was about a masquerader, and it was a lot of sci-fi kind of things going on. So first and foremost, we're targeting people who love to read books, people who would be into fantasy or paranormal, horror type of things, science fictions. And I also looked up some websites that, could go along with the genre of the book. Creepypasta. I don't know if you've ever heard about creepypasta, but when I was a kid, I used to read like scary stories on this website. That alongside Scare Street, and we can even go as general as Goodreads. I think there's no limit. That's the beauty of this program. There's no limit to where we can place this ad. So
that's awesome. And there's also another great way to expand your audience, which brings us to the other service we're happy to announce today. BookBaby is now offering translation services. Our clients can now have their manuscripts professionally translated by a native speaker and a linguistics expert. 2 people review each file.
That's awesome. How many languages can we translate in?
We've got 59 different languages and dialects. Naturally, we've got your Spanish, French, German, but we got Pashto, Korean, Swahili, and more.
Wow, man. What type of projects do you think we'll get for this?
Management's really excited about the prospect of having a service that brings back our back catalog around to work on their book again. But I'm really interested to see what type of manuscripts we get that are maybe handed down from grandparents and whatnot. Hopefully through our translation services, we can help bring some of these stories to life. And speaking of stories, our next interview is with a horror writer who's publishing her collection of short stories with us. Her name is Nati del Paso, and her book is called Women of Fire and Snow.
Yeah, that's a really good title.
Right? Both of our guests this week. Nati's short stories are mainly focused on the experiences of Mexican American and Mexican women. I strongly recommend everyone check it out. We'll wait to listen to the whole podcast for sure, and then go check it out on Bookshop. Here's Nati del Paso talking about the themes that she wrote about.
I try to finish with some of my stories are dark or don't have happy endings. So I try to finish with one that was a little bit more uplifting, and it's my favorite. So I want to start with my favorite story and also start with another one that I thought that I like because it takes place in Snoqualmie, Washington. I've been told it's one of my strongest stories, and I feel that it's thrilling for me and for some of the people who have read it. So I want to lead with those, but they are all related, and that in all of the characters are main protagonists are women, different ages that we have from teenager or from a young teenager to a 14-year-old to a 95-year-old shaman woman. And they all are at one time on one or the other side of the Mexican border. They all have Mexican heritage. Some, one of my characters doesn't even speak Spanish anymore. She's been raised in the North Pacific Northwest. And another of my character, is an undocumented woman who's trying to figure out her life here in the United States. So they all have that theme that they talk about women and gender violence and having one foot on different sides of the border. But they all are horror.
So I was curious. I read the first story, Illegal Matters, where the main character's father is detained by ICE. And how do you think about balancing the reality of what's happening on the border with the magical realism aspects, the supernatural aspects?
Well, I wish it was just on the border what's happening. But as you know, from Illegal Matters, it actually happens in Seattle. And the way I balance with the magical realism is because sometimes, and, we've heard it from other authors and from, I'm blanking out his name, from Heart of Darkness, that says sometimes man can be even worse. So for me, the magical realism helps face and confront some of these issues in our world that happen that are horrible. And confronting also some of the things that might not be horrible, but that we fear, right? Like death and, things we do not understand.
Interesting that you thought of Heart of Darkness. It's Joseph Conrad.
Yeah, Joseph Conrad.
I was thinking of Upton Sinclair and how he used the novel The Jungle to expose the horror of meatpacking plant in real life. Do you see your book attempting to do the same, exposing the banality of evil of ICE and our immigration system, and trying to explore that in a fictional setting?
Well, so I wrote down The Jungle because I haven't read that one, but now I'm going to go read it.
I don't think I've read it since 8th grade. So
I do want to, I feel that I do want to expose. I don't think that ICE just by itself could be called evil, but there are evil people everywhere. So, and there are certain realities that are cruel and evil and maybe unjust, or maybe we don't understand. So mostly more than exposing, it's trying to show, why would somebody come here? Why would somebody risk their life maybe to come to the border, to cross the border illegally? Somebody that came here legally, like I did, for example, because my father was American and I was born here. But then when I was very, very young, I was raised and lived in Mexico until I was 38. So why do people come here? Why do they want to come here? What are we looking for? What do we find? How do we deal through holding on to some things. And, one of my stories talks about a woman fleeing violence in Mexico, only to find it here in a shooter, right? When there's a shooting in a mall, a random shooting. So it's just I don't know, if I'm exposing anything, just showing it and trying to explain what do the people that are behind that feel, just remembering they're human beings, because it's really easy to think of the other. So it's more like, who is this person? Why did they come? And why do some people do some good things? And why do some people do bad things? And why do we have that dark side, right? And sometimes some of our dark side can be so horrible that's where the magic realism and the horror comes in, because it gives us a way to confront it.
I'm curious what sort of response you've gotten from the Mexican American and Mexican communities.
Well, for some, I'm just about to launch it. So now, as I've been spreading the word, I've gotten a lot of support, especially because I've tried it. Because one of my last story talks about the problem of femicide in Mexico. I decided I'm tying all my pre-sales to a fundraiser for an organization in Mexico that works against femicide. And so it's a real problem that, in Mexico, there's so many great people that are working on this, and they're doing it through art by bringing awareness through dance, through theater, through movies, through television series, and through writing. So there's a lot of people doing that there. And I've started, and people have been reaching out to me from here in the United States, women and other authors that are also concerned with this problem, been working on this. So it's not that I'm unique, but I've tied it to that. And I'm hoping that, to bring awareness and to be able to, as I've told people, what I'm doing and how the story ties within, I've gotten a really good response. I've also had a lot of support from a lot of friends that I have that are undocumented and that I know. And I feel, some of them have told me, like, thank you. Like, I feel, because I've given them the book and in advance, because I've been inspired by their stories. They're friends of mine. And they've told me, thank you. I love being able to read about somebody to have to go through something similar to what I went through, but it's also terrifying. And some people have told me, I don't like reading scary stuff, or I don't like reading things, things about difficult issues. And I completely get it. I respect that. There's things that I don't like to read. I don't like to look at watch some of the movies my husband likes to watch, like the Marvel Adventure movies. Sorry, I don't like them. So he can watch them on his own, and I'm fine with that. But yeah, so far the response has been positive.
That's great to hear. So your book is in English. I'm curious if you've, I would imagine you don't need to use our translation services, which we just launched this month. Have you considered releasing it in Spanish?
I have actually. At first, I was wondering if it would even have that enough, would have that appeal. One of the things that I do know is that people in Mexico don't worry so much about the people that are here. It's because, I felt that, like, okay, you left, right? You left to go find a better life or whatever. People seem to be focused, like, we need to focus on our problems here and what we're going here. And I do talk a lot about the life in the United States. But I have found that curiosity, because I'm really not talking about Mexico. Only one of my stories, the last one, happens in Mexico. But the main character, she's a young journalist who just graduated from the School of Journalism at UW Seattle in Washington. And she flies to Mexico because her cousin has been murdered. And that's when she starts to become aware of femicide in Mexico. And she starts researching and realizes it's a problem worldwide. We have that problem in the United States, where especially if you look at Native American women and the rate of violence and disappearance and murder of Native American women and women of color, it is horrific. And that when you look at 1 in 4 women in the United States are going to be victims of sexual assault, that's not sexual harassment. When I was reading this, I'm like, oh my God, we tend to think that it's something that happens there. So, I do want to translate it. I'm still waiting to see if there's that interest across. So far, it seems like there is. The other thing is that almost everybody in Mexico, everybody speaks English. Everybody really works. It's the language of commerce. It's the language. It's become the language of art, and anybody who wants to make it knows to speak English. And it's funny. I have a lot of friends. I even have a nephew who writes in English, and he lives in Mexico. He's never been out of Mexico. Lived outside of Mexico. He's lived in Mexico City all his life. He's a young man and he writes in English. So, yeah, I'm looking to see because if people start telling me, hey, I prefer to read in Spanish, would prefer to read in this, I'm fine. But I think it's more a picture of what's the immigrant in the United States, what it is when you're mixed, when you feel you don't belong neither here nor there. Here you're a Latinx. There, you're the gringa. So you're like, who am I? It's a little bit of that trying to find where I fit in and how you embrace all the good things that both cultures can give you, right? And we also have our dark sides on both. And how can we learn to overcome them, I guess?
So have you written any books in Spanish?
Not books. I used to write a lot of articles when I lived in Mexico. And then once I moved here, I would write articles for the newspaper in Reno, Nevada, where I lived. And then there was a Latino journal the name's Ahora. And so I would do both bilingual articles because actually I had to learn how to write in English before I start to write. I was very nervous and I was like, no, I don't know if I can write in English. Actually, when I did a master's here, and I was so afraid because I didn't know how to, all the different way we write in the United States, the language is so much more concise and in shorter sentences. So my husband, who's a lawyer, he would say, you write like a Mexican with long run-off sentences. So the first thing I did was learn how to write in English, learn the grammar, etc. And then I wrote my stories and then I had them edited. And then thank God my editor said, you know what? You need to take some creative writing classes. And she was right. I really didn't know the craft. So it took me more than a couple of years, and I'm still studying, but to actually learn how to structure a story, how, it's not just having good grammar or having a grasp of the language, but how to pacing, character development. I went through, I think, what every beginning writer does. First you have idealized versions of characters that, nobody likes because they're like so perfect and all the things we all go through. So through that process. And then, that's when and this is the first time I've self-published or been published a book.
So as somebody who only speaks English, I've always been really fascinated by that idea that the language itself is going to be structured differently and how it kind of shapes the ideas that you even can have. So I'm curious, do you find it really different writing in Spanish versus English?
Yes.
Is your process different at all?
Yes, completely. And what I've found is that now it's harder for me to switch. So it's really, if I'm only, right now I'm listening mostly to audiobooks in English. I have a very long commute to the university. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks and a lot of podcasts. Thank you for your podcast. Yours and Hidden Brain, those are my favorite. And, I'll listen to the one about there's others for writers that I listen to. And if I'm reading in English and writing in English and watching television in English, it's really hard for me to switch into Spanish. And then for example, I'll be with my kids and we'll watch a movie in Spanish because they'll come for Thanksgiving, and or we'll be talking to my cousins in Mexico over Zoom in Spanish, and I'll read a book in Spanish, and then it gets harder to switch. But yeah, I feel that as I've developed my writing as a horror writer, which I've embraced now, I can see myself writing it in English and then translating it, but not really creating it in Spanish.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, is if you were kind of formulating the thoughts in your head in English versus Spanish. I remember being told after like 4 years of German class that like, that's the trick. Like, that's the moment when okay, I actually know this language.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I sometimes feel that if you really want to learn a language, you really do have to immerse yourself. The same way when you're going to write, you immerse yourself in all the themes, of everything. What am I going to talk about? What is, I look at some of the pre-Hispanic mythology too, and some of the native mythology, because I live on the land of the Snoqualmie tribe. So what are some of their legends? What are some of their beliefs and some of their stories and their myths? And how can I tie them on into to what I'm writing about? And bring in some of the Mexican, if you look at some of the Aztecs or the Mexicas culture, and also some of the Maya, there's some really horrifying stuff there, which is, and the way Mexicans look at death, just look at Day of the Dead. And there's a lot there to be explored, the different demons. And I find it fascinating how you can tie it in, and it can bring a different quality of horror.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any specific authors who influenced your writing?
Oh, yeah. Well, for example, right now, and I fell in love with Stephen Graham Jones. Oh, his books, I just love his horror stories. I'm going to start the newest one right now, My Heart's a Chainsaw, but he ties in a lot of his Native American heritage into the stories without being that magical, but really the raw and I guess the dark side too, that we all bring, the shadow side. So I just really enjoy reading him. I've been reading Silvia Moreno Garcia, which I find her really fun because she has a lot of the Mexican, she's a Mexican, she lives in Canada, but she's of Mexican heritage and writes in English. And so I find a lot of enjoyment of her books. But, there's a lot of, I read a lot. I just, from all kinds of horror. And of course, my first favorite one was Stephen King when I started getting more into the English. But I was, they started me at 8 with Edgar Allan Poe. And then I remember reading The Exorcist. I was hiding and reading The Exorcist when I was 11 years old with my sister, and then having, nightmares and terrors forever because we were super Catholic. So it was very, very scary. And maybe that's what got me into psychology, to heal all those traumas from scaring myself. But yeah, I think some of the influences, I would say, I love Stephen King, but what I love about him is how he gets into the characters' heads, the monologues, the internal monologues, like of the parents, like going into that what really struck a chord with me is how he goes into the purpose, and you can really see the thoughts unfiltered, and how a mom can say, like, yeah, I wish I could just stop the car and leave, at the side of the road, which you're never going to do, but to be able to see those dark thoughts that we have, and then to somehow make them materialize in horror. They materialize sometimes as something exterior, right? A demon, a monster.
And that was Nati del Paso. You can find more about her on natidelpaso.com and can buy her book, Women of Fire and Snow, on Bookshop now, along with thousands of other independently published horror books, and get ready for Halloween.
Do you have a costume yet?
I don't. I think I'm more likely to get a costume for my pup, though. What about you?
I'm not really one for costumes, but I always get a kick out of the creative things that these people put on these days.
One man who has dealt with horror in one way or the other is our VP of Operations, Joel Maxey. Joel has been with BookBaby and our parent company DIY Media for 29 years and was able to take some time out of his busy day to chat with me. Joel, how's the print shop looking?
It's looking great. We finally completed construction on our new print cell. It is fully up and operational. It's about a $3 million investment. Nice big bright windows, happy place to be.
And that's where the offices used to be?
That's where the offices used to be. Yeah, there's a lot of excited employees that they're not, they're in a nice bright room with a good work environment.
And you can never get us back into the office now.
We're figuring that out too.
So are we operating at max capacity, would you say?
Yes, we are. Actually, we have capacity, but we have, with the investment, we are up to 5 HP Indigo presses. We have 3 binding lines, puts the cover on the book block, and 2 hard casing.
So how much has that capacity improved since last year?
We've actually effectively doubled the capacity that we had at this time last year.
That's awesome. And how's staffing looking to keep those machines running?
Staffing is great. We probably have about 55 people in the print operations at this point.
And all operating safely?
All operating safely. We're doing 24/5 shifts on the presses. So we do have some capacity over the weekends if we need it. Our peak season coming up.
I know broken supply chains are all over the news these days. How are we looking? Do we have the raw materials necessary to keep making books?
We do. I can't say that it's not a dogfight every day to get supply, but luckily we are in great shape with our paper inventory. We've always purchased from American mills. So a lot of what you hear about in the news with paper being hard to get is because it's coming from China and Europe, and it's stuck on containers. So one of the merchants we use actually has about 200 tons just sitting on ships.
Wow.
That they can't get in. But luckily, we've had the mill reps in here over the past few months, and they've assured us a supply through the end of the year. We're looking good for the beginning of the year. We already have our orders way out. So, and we're in great shape because we're predictable. So a lot of your commercial printers buy certain, different types of paper that are spec to the jobs. We actually offer 3 different choices, and, we can bump those orders up.
Okay. So if I'm getting this right, the customization of the book itself is kind of irrelevant for you. It's just the raw product.
Trim size. Exactly. So the trim sizes are different, right? Everything, the content's always different, but the paper is pretty consistent.
That's great. That's good to hear. So what message would you have then for a prospective author here in October 2021?
Get your orders in. It's a great time to release your book, and we have the capacity to make them.
Get your orders in. You heard it from our very own VP of Operations, Joel Maxey. Thanks go out to Joel for jumping on the podcast, as well as to our other guests, J.S. Nelson and Nati del Paso. Their books and thousands of others independently published books can be found at store.bookbaby.com. If you're interested in publishing with BookBaby, we want to hear from you. Our staff is standing by at 877-961-6878 or info@bookbaby.com. Thanks go out to all of our guests this season. If you haven't listened, be sure to check out our back catalog. There are some great interviews in there. And we'll be back in the new year with more episodes of the BookBaby Spotlight. So be sure to subscribe, follow, rate, share, like this BookBaby Spotlight podcast on whatever platform you're on. Chad, any final thoughts?
I just want to re-emphasize the importance of the display ads program. This is a very unique opportunity for authors to get their books in front of millions of people that otherwise would not be able to see it. So I'm just urging you guys, please order your ads today.
All right. And until next year, stay safe, everyone.